And welcome to Patriots 4th and 2. I am your host today, Derek Havens, and joining me, as always, is Mr. Steve Balestrieri. We are both PatsFans.com bloggers. We are doing our Patriots draft recap show today. Seriously, everybody, I am apologize through the nose. This is a week overdue, Steve. We are recording this Monday, May 9th. I wanted to do the show. Steve wanted to do the show last week. I was absolutely sick of the dog last week, and Steve was tied up as well. So, you know what, Steve? I'm trying to turn this into a positive because honestly, I don't know if I was up to doing a show last week. I was pretty pissed off. I'm not gonna lie, I will get to that in a second. Luckily, our other co-host Russ, who's been taking the summer of Russ, he's been going. He's been occupied with everything else. He stopped in for a 21 long minute Russ's rant. That if you listen to the show and you have the show downloaded on whatever platform that you use, and by the way, please subscribe to us on Apple and YouTube. I would say that Russ's rant was really level-headed, Steve. Honestly, it was a good rant. I called him out. I called him up and I said, Russ, honestly, that was a very level-headed take. I disagreed with most of it, but I didn't disagree with all of it. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I think. I honestly appreciated, Russ stepping in and kind of bringing some. I guess like I said, level-headedness, some calmness, some perspective. Because I do, as kind of upset I was about a couple of things, Steve, which we'll elaborate here shortly. As much as I was upset about some things, I also think that some of the blowback was way over the top. So we're going to go ahead and hash through this. So what we're going to do today is Steve and I are going to literally go through each one of the picks and give our takes on it. So Steve, let's start off with round one. We had Cole Strange was the first pick for the Patriots. And look, this is someone who, for those of you who have followed along, for Steve and I through the pre-draft process, we talked about Cole Strange when we talked about our interior offensive linemen. I think it was the first show that we did, Steve. I think we did receivers and offensive linemen, the very first prospect breakdown. And Cole Strange was a player, Steve, that certainly had a lot of Patriots traits. I think a lot of people had him in the day 2 range, second, third, maybe even fourth round, depending on who you listen to. But we had talked about someone as a possibility, again, who I thought would be in that next tier down. So the Patriots trade down from 21 to 29. Steve, I want to give us credit. We nailed the absolute crap out of the Chiefs Patriots trade. We talked about that for 2 months, literally 2 months leading up to the draft. It just made way too much sense. The Patriots got some good draft ammo, and they were able to take a player. Of course, in my nightmare scenario, Steve, if you remember from my mock draft, I had the Patriots doing that and the Chiefs taking a receiver. I didn't even think about my favorite player or one of my favorite players of the draft, Trent McDuffie, being on the board and the Patriots trading out and the Chiefs taking him anyway, which honestly was just salt in the wound for me, okay? But I do like that the Patriots stuck and picked at 29. But the player we're going to talk about right now, the player I like, Steve, I like the player. The Patriots addressed an obvious need. You can debate if they created the need themselves. I think that's fair. But the Patriots took an offensive lineman, Cole Strange, from University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, at 29 overall. Give me your thoughts on the player.
Well, on the player, I think he's outstanding. I thought he was the third best guard in the draft. I know most people had Zion Johnson and Kenyon Green. They were flip-flopping those guys between 1 and 2. Correct. And then Cole Strange was the third. So, I mean, he's an athletic freak. He tested one of the best for the guards since 1987, they said.
Yeah, the new relative athletic score, RAS, is very popular now. It's, big analytics, and that's a theme throughout the Patriots draft class. Clearly, they were targeting athletes and speed, which we'll get to. But yes, Cole Strange did test extremely well athletically, Steve.
And he's versatile. He can play all along the offensive line. He can be a center or a guard. He actually can play some tackle, although that's not where they need him. I imagine in the case of a dire emergency, they might be able to throw him out there. But he's still versatile. He can play center or either guard position. Right. As a player, I think it was an outstanding pick.
Yeah. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just agreeing with you. But yeah, I agree. I think that Cole Strange will be the Patriots left guard this year. I think Mike Onwenu will slide back into his natural home base position at right guard like he did at Michigan. And David Andrews will be at center, and then you'll have Wynn at left tackle and Trent Brown at right tackle, and let's hope everybody stays healthy. I will say this. I firmly disagree with taking interior offensive linemen that high. And look, I don't want to beat a dead horse because I know that a lot of people, again, we're a week late. Okay, like I understand that people have heard this. I don't want to be overly negative. I'm just telling you what I believe, and what I believe is that unless you're a team with very little holes, like the Buffalo Bills are a prime example of that right now. They're stacked across the board. They can take whoever they want. Okay, the Patriots, when they took Logan Mankins in 2005, they had won 3 out of the last 4 Super Bowls. The team was a wagon. Okay, and they took Logan Mankins, and yes, it worked out. I don't want to put too high of expectations on Cole Strange, but he better be a good player because really, this is a Patriots team that has a ton of holes, and to take a player, Steve, that plays an interior offensive line position when the team has done a phenomenal job identifying, drafting, developing, and just countless of interior offensive linemen. I mean, just the list goes on and on. I could list 2 minutes of interior offensive linemen that they've done a great job doing this well, that they've gotten in the 3rd, 4th, or undrafted. Michael Onwenu right now is a 6th rounder. David Andrews was undrafted. Okay, they got Shaq Mason in the 4th round, and they traded him, and then they drafted another guy in the 1st round. I just felt like, Steve, that as much as I liked Cole Strange, I think that they should have targeted a premier position first and come back later. Okay, and I just want to also say this. Forget it doesn't. I don't care if anyone anyone who's going to tell me like, oh, who cares what you think? I agree. Who cares what I think? But someone like Mel Kiper, Daniel Jeremiah, Dane Brugler, these guys all had Cole Strange in like the 69, 73, range of their prospect rankings. So these guys, it doesn't matter what I think or what Steve thinks. Okay, these are 3 people who are experts and do this for their career, their livelihood, and they're usually pretty damn good. And they all had this player significantly lower. Now, I know that really doesn't matter, okay? But I just think that that's why some people were so surprised. For one, it was just the surprise of the player where he was taken. For 2, it was the position. So that's where I think that people should kind of understand, okay, well, I understand why people are a little frustrated by that. Because to me, I think that there's other guys that you could have taken, Steve, later and filled the same need and addressed a higher priority position earlier. So anyway, that's my rant. I'm done with it. Steve, your thoughts on that, and we'll move on to the Taekwondo.
Well, and again, as I texted you that night, I wasn't happy with the pick at all. And then, honestly, I thought about it. It was because they didn't take who I wanted.
Sure.
So I was really upset with it. But I thought about it. I mean, and I listened to Bill after, the draft was over, or that night, I should say, after that round. And he said that they, Strange was on their list even at 21. So that was the guy they wanted. And as we all know, they don't care what conventional wisdom says. Yep. They're going to go with their gut, on this type of thing. And they had Strange all along. And, I really wanted them to go linebacker in round 1. But
I wanted corner,
and showed you how much I know because they didn't take a linebacker the entire draft. So,
well, to put on that, Steve, I've heard that a lot, and I'll just say this as well. I think the fact they didn't take a linebacker we'll see if they sign anyone and what happens until training camp. I think that could mean that they like who they have in the room, or they want to see what they have in the room, and they didn't need to add to it. They said, you know what, we just traded for Mack Wilson. Let's see what he can do. By the way, Mack Wilson's played I think 3 years. This is his 4th year, and he's like 4 months older than like Devin Lloyd from Utah. So, like, Devin Lloyd was an older player. Mack Wilson was a younger player when he got taken from Alabama by Cleveland. So, I mean, who knows what they think of Cameron McGrone or Anthony Jennings or Josh Uche or some of these guys, Steve? I think, to your point, I just wonder if maybe they feel comfortable with letting the kids play. I mean, kids, respectfully, of course, these are grown men, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So...
Macro said that after the draft, he was talking about that. And he said that, they drafted some young players, Josh Uche He mentioned Anthony Jennings,
Mm-hmm.
Cameron McGrone, and they picked up Raekwon McMillan last year. And as you and I talked about, if they didn't take anybody with the intention on seeing what they have with these young guys, I can live with that if it doesn't work. But bringing back the older guys like Hightower and Van Noy, who just signed with the Chargers, and Jamie Collins, I would rather them see what they have with these younger players. They're more athletic, and if they struggle, so be it. So,
yeah, I'm with you. Honestly, I thought they should have done that the last 2 years, but that's story for another day. Okay, I mean, I'm not trying to be all pissed off all day long, Steve, but I honestly, the thing that bothers me the most is the fact that they have done such a good job at doing something like drafting and developing interior offensive linemen, and they've done it consistently well for 2 decades, consistently well. Okay, so people could look at me and be like, "Well, what do you know? You're an idiot." Well, I'm just complimenting the team and saying this is one of the best things they do, and they just used a first-round asset to me.
With all the talks about the draft, they do a great job with interior offensive linemen.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
offensive linemen in general, actually. So.
And they've done a great job identifying a lot of players late in the draft and as undrafted guys. I mean, at a lot of different positions. So to me, it's just a philosophical disagreement, and I hope Bill's right. I hope I look like an idiot. I really do. So we'll move on. But yeah, I do like Cole Strange as the player. I definitely want to make that clear. We both like Cole Strange as the player. So anyway, Tyquan Thornton at number 2, Steve, second overall or second player for the Patriots overall, 50th overall in the draft. The Patriots moved up here, Steve, and they targeted Tyquan Thornton from Baylor. And let me just say this. Another one, I was thrilled they took a receiver, shocked they took Tyquan Thornton. Tyquan Thornton, another player, kind of the theme in this draft that was, by many of the draft experts, thought to have been going later. I mean, a lot of people had him as kind of an early day 3 guy, even maybe a late day 2, player, but a lot of like 4th, 5th round draft grades on him. That really doesn't matter, though. They moved up for him. I want to say, 4 or 5 picks? I guess they were at 54, right? So, and the interesting thing about Thornton, Steve, is I didn't even mention him when we were doing our draft prospect breakdown. And the reason why is because he is so atypical of what the Patriots have looked for in a receiver. I honestly, for one, he ran. People thought he broke the NFL Combine 40 record when he ran an unofficial 4.21. And then it was changed to 4.28, which is still blazing fast. And if you watch, unbelievable. And if you watch his game highlights or his film or whatever, it stands out. He can separate. There's no doubt, which is great news. He does translate to an X receiver. And I do think this could potentially be Nelson Aguilar's replacement after this year, but we're going to get to that in a second. He did not test well in the 3-cone, really any agility testing. And we thought they were going to be looking for a quicker rather than fast guy and a slot guy over an outside guy. They went with a fast outside guy. I do think it's funny though, Steve, that Matt Groh in his pre-draft presser talked about how you have to be aggressive when you identify when you're talking about finding these dynamic receivers. You got to be aggressive and go get it. They just took one in the second round and they traded up to get him. So. You know what? We'll compare. There was a run of receivers right after him. They got taken by the Steelers to George Pickens, Sky Moore to the Chiefs. There's several others. The Alec Pierce to the Colts, I think, from Cincinnati. So, like it or not, those guys are going to be linked, and people are going to be looking at that window right there. Because if Tyquan Thornton is really good, the Patriots are going to look like geniuses. But if this is them taking N'Keal Harry over AJ Brown and Deebo Samuel a couple picks later, they're going to get killed for it. And
rightfully so.
Rightfully so. So, thoughts on Thornton, Steve? Because I mean, really, just fascinating.
I think you hit the nail on the head because. Again, looking at him and his dynamic, that's not the guy that the Patriots usually go for. They go for the shorter, quicker slot guys, or they go for the big physical X guys.
Yep.
And this guy everyone was complaining that they have a need for speed. Well, he checks that block. and they had a need for a guy who can separate. This guy can separate. Now, a lot of the criticism about him was that, he didn't have great numbers for yards after the catch. But, some of the guys that I read said if you look at the quarterbacks that he played with at Baylor, that's the reason why. The quarterbacks that he played with weren't very good.
He also averaged in his last season over 15 yards catch. So what does that tell you? That tells you his depth per reception, his routes that he was running. He was already picking up first down. So yeah, I agree. When I watched him, Steve, I went back to watch him because I barely looked at him because again, total omission on my part. I'm hand up. I totally ruled him out, and that was a mistake on my part because of the build and because of what he projects to. But I just am sitting here looking at Nelson Aguilar, and Steve had to step all away for a quick second, so no worries. But I guess I just was totally taken off guard by the type of player that the Patriots went with. And, to me, I think that if you're looking at this year as a Patriots fan, okay, what is the receiver core going to look like? I think it's going to be Nelson Aguilar and Vontae Parker on your outside. I think Kendrick Bourne could potentially be your slot guy, or you could even have Aguilar in the slot and KB outside. And I do think that Myers will be worked into that mix as well. Problem with Thornton I have is that he likely won't see a lot of action, I don't think, in year one. I think he'll be learning the playbook. I'm sure he'll have anywhere from like 15 to 25 catches, and then it'll be more of a year two thing. I think in that second year where, remember, Nelson Aguilar is a free agent after this next season. You have I want to say, was it Myers who's a free agent after this year? KB has 2 years left. Devontae has 2 years left. So I think Thornton's going to project to be in the starting mix. I just don't expect it to be right away. But he was really productive. Thornton, extremely productive his senior year. I'll pull up the stats here in a second. I should have done that, but I got distracted doing the one-man band thing for a second.
Sorry about that.
No worries. So what I was just saying, I was kind of recapping what I think the Patriots receiver room was going to do or was going to look like. And, if you look at Thornton's numbers his senior year, I don't have them in front of me, but really productive. I think what you should be concerned of as a Patriots fan, my biggest concern, Steve, is that Baylor receivers haven't really translated well to the NFL throughout recent years. Corey Coleman comes to mind. Josh Gordon came out several years ago, but it was a supplemental draft. It was kind of weird there. They've had a couple of guys that just really haven't been able to make that transition. But I do think, I kind of throw that out because it's like, what Ohio State quarterback's done well? Well, I think C.J. Stroud's a pretty damn good quarterback, and he's going to go in the first round next year. So I don't really believe in that. I'm just saying kind of what the facts are. But Thornton, fascinating from a speed standpoint, Steve. I was saying while you were gone that I really don't expect him to have a big role in year one. I think it's going to be like 15, 25 catches because I just think the other guys, there's just too many guys in front of him. But I do think year two he'll be a starting top 3 receiver in this offense. Do you agree? Disagree?
I don't know. I mean, I think in year one they're probably going to limit his route tree and give him certain ones so they can use him right away.
Yep.
I wouldn't be surprised if he had a 35, 40 catch season.
Okay. I like your optimism. I do.
I mean, again, this goes against type for them. And they moved up. I mean, this wasn't like, everyone took wide receivers and this was the guy who was left. They started that next little trend or the run on, taking wide receivers at that point. And this was the guy they targeted. And, Thornton is only the 7th wide receiver that the Patriots have drafted since 2000 in the first 3 rounds. And we always talk about they have trouble, identifying and producing.
Yeah, except no one ever brings up they always take like late day 3 guys.
Yeah, they're taking like day 3 guys. And
Josh Boyce from TCU in the 6th round doesn't count.
Yeah, in 22 years, they've only taken 7 wide receivers in the first 3 rounds. I mean, that's not a lot. So I mean, they really like this guy, and a lot of people kept saying, he's 5th round, he's a 5th round. We talk about the draft analysts, and one of the guys that I quoted a lot in my draft profiles was Lance Zierlein, from the NFL.com, and on his last mock draft, he had Thornton going number 55 with Arizona.
Yeah.
So that's not a big leap at that point for the Patriots.
No, and it's funny because his original draft profile on Tyquan Thornton, he actually compared him to Tyquan Underwood, which was kind of funny because if everyone remembers, he was a Buccaneers receiver the Patriots, I think, traded for. It was the year of the Super Bowl, the second year against the Giants, I want to say. And he was infamous for being cut the morning of the Super Bowl. Yes. And I remember there was a lot of people who were either really up in arms or whatever. I remember that well. But anyway, I hope Thornton's a much better player than Underwood was because he was predominantly a special teamer. But I do agree with you, Steve. I think he was. As much as I want to slam position, where these prospects were quote unquote ranked, where the Patriots took them, because I do think that it happened a lot, with several of these players. I also am okay, Cole Strange was, he was rumored to be really liked by the Buccaneers. Which, by the way, they traded out for the first round as soon as he went, and then they took a guard in the second round, Luke Gadecki from Central Michigan, who was a tackle in college, but he's going to play guard, and so maybe that's not that far off. And also the Bears were linked, and the Cardinals were linked, and also the Bucks just had Ali Marpet, the guard, retire, and Cole Strange has been comp to Ali Marpet a lot, and Thornton was rumored to be really liked by the Steelers in the second round, and the Patriots traded up for him. So what I really want to say is, I'm kind of arguing with myself a little bit, Steve, but what I really want to say is, I don't care about the draft guides. The draft guides really don't matter. These prospects are ranked, and I do think it's a little frustrating, but at the same time, it only takes one team. So the fact they traded up for this receiver, Steve, over a team that they thought were going to take receivers, at least makes me excited for that, because they identified the guy and they went after him. We'll find out in several years if they're right or wrong. Okay,
right? But I'll tell you what. I mean, one of the things we've been talking about, and we've talked about it on this show ad nauseum, was they lack speed. At the receiver position, and we saw it last year. Mac Jones faced the most 8-man boxes in the league, and they ended up blitzing that 8th man quite a bit on him. So I think when he's on the field, the opposing team has to respect that. I mean,
agreed.
That one thing that he's got the speed, he's got that separation, off the line. He can separate really, really well. So again, I'm really excited to see what he can do at the next level. I don't think he's going to have the intricate route tree in year one. I think they're going to simplify because they really want this kid on the field.
I'm laughing because I remembered that reading his draft profile on several things, I have never seen a guy have a negative in his column that said tiny wrists. And that's what they said about Tyquan Thornton. Apparently he has small wrists. Okay, I guess I know people want to hate Felger and Mass, but when they mock, these draft boards and everything with their throwing the dart thing and the guide, this is why, because those are some of those funny, lines where it's tiny wrists. Okay, he apparently has small hands too, but you know what? He looked pretty good catching the ball in college, so I'll throw that out there.
And his hands are bigger than Tyree Hill's.
So. Yes, thank you for mentioning that. I literally almost did, but I'm trying to speed this thing up. But I do want to chime in with have Kevin chime in with a comment. He just puts D+. I respect it. I totally understand the grade. I'm not doing draft grades, but yeah, that's kind of where I would have them too. But we're going to find out. Chris writes in, I just hope we're not kicking ourselves for not taking Sky Moore. I would agree. That's a player that Steve and I both liked, and that's kind of who I was hoping for in that second round. Again, Tyquan Thornton was the pick. Totally different. Honestly, Steve, the thing I like the most about Tyquan Thornton is that it's a fast, deep threat who's going to play outside, which is going to drive Russ crazy. Because he said, they don't need that. Well, they just traded up for a guy in the second round to do that, Russ. So, now he's really conflicted.
And really, Mac Rose said he's not just a linear player. So
yes. I would say for Thornton, lastly, he did separate well. I did think he went down pretty easily after contact. I would say also, once he catches the ball, if he has an angle on the defensive back, he's going. He absolutely has that sixth gear, Steve, where he can kick it up and just pull away. And he's pulling away from guys, in that level of college football, to pull away by 10 yards, some of these defensive backs is Crazy. So I'm really excited to see what he looks like. This might be my favorite pick of the draft, Steve. Okay, we both talked about Marcus Jones a lot. Yes, he's a little small in stature, but if you watch him, you should be excited because he doesn't have maybe the long speed that Tyquan does, but super twitched up. This is Marcus Jones, the cornerback from Houston. Fascinating player, Steve. Electric punt and kick returner. Real sticky in coverage. He's going to be a slot corner for the Patriots. He plays the competitive edge that I just love watching it. Give me your thoughts on Marcus Jones. I've been ranting and raving all shows so far. You go.
Like you, I love this pick because I can't see where anyone could have anything negative to say about him. Yes, he is not the tallest guy, but you watch him play, and Houston wasn't afraid to put him against really big wide receivers because he was so athletic. He could still go up and compete for the football. I love the fact that he's so versatile. He can return punts. He can return kickoffs. And again, going back to their second round pick, I kind of thought when they were moving up, they were going to take Jones from Tennessee because of his return ability. And then I'm like, well, here's their answer for return guy, and he can return kickoffs and punts. I love this pick. I think this guy is going to be an instant crowd favorite. I think he's going to start on day one because he's going to be returning kicks as soon as the season starts.
Yeah, I mean, he's a ball hawk, man. I mean, he was extremely productive at, picking balls off. Something I saw consistently, Steve, on watching him was he is, for one, it's so hard to mirror and match receivers with man coverage where it's like, okay, you're in the slot. It's so hard because you don't have the boundary on the outside, like an outside corner, to use the sidelines. You can go left or right. That's what makes slot corners so hard to find and so valuable. And Jones, to me, there's a lot of Joneses. It's going to be tough to distinct through that, okay? But Marcus Jones, to me, his ability to flip his hips left or right, follow the receiver, really, really did it well. Another thing I liked, actually, former Patriot and Colt and defensive back for the NFL, Darius Butler, actually talked to me about this once. When you're talking about a defensive back following a receiver, if he's like a step or two behind him, it's called in phase. It's in phase versus out of phase. And Marcus Jones' ability to stay in phase, meaning he's like right in the hip pocket of the receiver that he's covering, and undercut the route and put his arm in and break up a pass. You saw that consistently watching him. His ability to undercut routes and knock the ball and get the pass break up, tremendous. And I mean, Steve, we'll see. He could be too small to play. I think that's the biggest worry for him. But there's been a lot of cornerbacks that have been 5'8", 5'9", that have had success in the league. And you know what? I think for him, for one, I think these defensive backs, we're going to talk about another one here in a second. I do think that the depth chart is kind of thin there, so I think they'll get run early. But I do think Marcus Jones will be immediately, at least in the conversation, for punt and kickoff returns. And this is someone who started at Troy, transferred to Houston, actually played some receiver. They used him as some receiver packages. I wouldn't totally rule out the Patriots using him in some capacity on offense, maybe with screens or something. His ability to get him in space and use some of his return ability, in the offensive game. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I just wouldn't rule it out.
Right, and anything that puts the defense in the react mode. Mm-hmm. So they see a guy like him come in, and they're automatically thinking, okay, this is going to be some kind of a gadget play. Mm-hmm. And so they're reacting to you rather than them dictating.
Exactly. So, and that didn't happen enough. That hasn't happened enough.
Exactly. And I just think I think he's going to be a crowd favorite. I'm very, very intrigued to see him on the field.
Yeah, I am too. Really excited about this pick. Jack Jones, the next cornerback taken. I'll say this. Jack Jones, to me, was a surprise where he was taken 4th round. A lot of people thought he was going to go late day 3. He went early day 3. The Patriots clearly like him, and I feel like I understand why, because he does have a little bit of Asante Samuel, J.C. Jackson vibes to him with his if you look at his RAS, It's very similar to Asante Samuel's and his ball hawking, ability. Asante Samuel, J.C. Jackson kind of gave me those vibes. He's smaller. Again, he's smaller. I want to say, Steve, I'm going to look it up here because I have his draft profile. I want to say he is 5'11", he's 170. So he's going to have to bulk up a little bit, I think. But here's the thing. He was a highly, highly recruited player that went to USC. Very good early on. Then him and a couple of buddies broke into I think it was a Panda Express or a PF Chang's, or I think it was a Panda Express. And he got arrested for burglary. Went on to Arizona State. He's a little bit of an older rookie. I think he's 24, almost 25 years old. And at Arizona State, he definitely had a couple of up and down games, but he has the ability to take the ball away a lot. There is some intrigue here, Steve, with me. Honestly, this is just my take. I'm rooting for every one of these guys to be good. There are other players I would have liked the Patriots to draft that were on the board, same position. There were other players that I liked more. Jack Jones, to me, I feel like, here's a hot take. Okay, we can play this back later, but he's either going to be off the team and after a year, or he's going to be like a 6 to 8 interception a year cornerback and potentially a Pro Bowler. Like, I do think he has that ability where he could be a ball hawking stud like J.C. Jackson and go get a bag in a couple of years and do great. But I also think there's a little bit of a risk with this player too. Give me your thoughts on Jack Jones from Arizona State.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head again. Boomer bust guy. I mean, I think the reason he fell so badly was because not so much of his on-field, but his off-field issues, especially earlier in his college career. So I think that was a big part of the reason. But he can play, and I think he's shown that. And I think they took a little bit of a flyer on him because, again, like you said, they're looking at the potential ceiling for this guy. And if he works out the way like a guy like J.C. Jackson or Asante Samuel worked out, he'll be a steal in round 4.
Yeah, I agree. And I think something that both Jones cornerbacks, going back to Marcus and now Jack, I think both of them need to get a little bit stronger. And like many college cornerbacks struggled in press coverage, which the Patriots do like doing man press, sometimes press coverage, but I do think they're going to be going more to a zone. At least that's the rumors, so we'll see. I think Jack Jones' ability and Marcus Jones, both Jones, with John Jones in the backfield and Matt Jones, it's going to be wild. So with both these Jones rookies that we're talking about, I like their ability to break on the ball, and I do think that is something that the Patriots, in my mind, Steve, targeted in these picks. They are guys that are kind of aggressive, kind of alpha demeanors, play with a chip on their shoulder, very competitive, maybe not super fast, but have good hips and can kind of make plays on the ball. That is a theme we saw with these picks here, Steve. So we're going to find out. I mean, I hope so, because they really need to help the cornerback. To me, this was the biggest need, and they didn't address it until 85 and 121. So, we'll see what happens. Let's step aside real quick, Steve. We'll step aside for podcast purposes, take a quick break, and then we're going to continue with the rest of the Patriots draft class. All right, Steve, we are back on Patriots 4th and 2 to recap the Patriots draft class. We've been going through the whole class so far, and our next up is round 4, 127 overall, Pierre Strong. And Steve, this is a player that was really intriguing and has, again, I would say, blistering speed. I think he ran a 4.37, I want to say. Don't hold me to that 100%, but I want to say a 4.37, 40. He can absolutely fly. Really kind of an electric player in the backfield. We thought running back could potentially be addressed kind of in this day 3 range because of Damian Harris being in a contract year, but they did take 2 running backs, which I was shocked about. We'll circle back to that. Pierre Strong, though, really interesting player, Steve. Give me your thoughts on what you think about him as a player, and what do you think about him and his offense moving forward?
Yeah, as you know, in round 4, I was kind of hoping for the kid from Georgia at that point, the pass catching. Was it Jack Jones?
No, James Cook. He went to the
James
Bills.
Cook. I'm sorry. All these Joneses. I got Joneses on my mind. James Cook. But anyway, Pierre Strong to me is another really intriguing pick. This guy has home run speed. And again, that seems to be the theme of their draft this year. They were going after speed and athleticism. This guy has a slew of 50-yard touchdowns. So, I mean, he has that breakaway speed. He seems like a rising, I'm not going to say already a good, but a rising ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. He's already a good pass protector, on passing downs, which the Patriots really, they stress that with their running backs. And that's what holds a lot of them back when you see those red shirt years for their running backs, is because they haven't mastered pass protection. He can do that. He brings that element of breakaway speed to the offense. Again, I like this pick quite a bit. And especially where they took him, I think that's a perfect spot. And, again, we don't know what James White's situation is. I spoke with Evan Lazar about a week ago, and he was saying that, from what he's heard, he's not going to be ready to start, when they hit.
Oh, I can't imagine he would be. I mean, he just started walking.
So you have that, little bit of a hole at third down, and if you bring in a guy like this, and if he's able to, bring you a little bit of a dynamic on third down out of the backfield, either running the football or catching it with that speed he has, I like this. That will really help this offense.
Yeah, you know what? I think that Pierre Strong right away could definitely be part of the committee. I do think he is right now a first, second down player. But I mean, everything you read, everything you watch, you talk to people, he's someone who I think they believe he could potentially develop into a third down back. And I think he'll be a great change of pace guy for this room. I mean, J.J. Taylor's been trying to latch on, just hasn't quite done it. I don't know exactly what they think of him. I'm rooting for him because I'm a U of A homer, bear down. But I also think that you kind of know with running backs pretty quickly, right? Whether they're going to be, whether they're going to hit or not. To me, I think with this kind of speed, he's someone who you could kind of bring in for a couple of plays here and there. Defense will be kind of a change of pace, with you have Stevenson and Harris, kind of pound in the middle, or Pierre Strong can kind of scoot out to the corner. Really, really like his ability to put his foot in the ground, cut, and go. I think you saw that a lot. He has like that weird Dion Lewis, it's like, you remember that play when Dion Lewis was having that great season before he got hurt in Dallas, and it was like right before the goal line, and he evaded like 4 jump defenders, and you're like,
I was at that game.
Were you?
I was at that game in Dallas.
Yeah, so it's like, so what I'm talking about. It's like this weird, like, spatial awareness where it's like he could see everywhere around him. And and I think Strong has some of that kind of like spatial awareness that makes, smaller running backs so difficult to bring down. And so there's a lot to like here. I do think that where he landed is in a perfect scheme fit. And I do think as part of a committee, he could definitely, he has a great vision. I think he could definitely contribute early on. So again, really nice pick there. Bailey Zappi, Steve, not surprising they took a quarterback. I am a little surprised with who they took. I was hoping for Carson Strong from Nevada at this point, but we don't always get what we want. Sometimes we got to eat our vegetables, and we get Bailey Zappi. So we got the Western Kentucky quarterback in the day 3. Zappi to me, Steve, some similarities to Mac Jones, I would say. But I was shocked by the reaction of this pick. It seemed like a lot of... This was like some of the most garbage talk radio fodder I've ever heard of, they took a quarterback in the 4th round. I guess they're not that high on Mac Jones. Like, what are you talking about? Look at Tom Brady. After Tom Brady had won his first Super Bowl, look at between that moment and the time he left, how many quarterbacks the Patriots used a top 150 pick on? A lot. Thank you, Steve. a lot. They took quarterback in the fourth round. If you don't like it, that's fine. They want to draft and develop. They like to draft and develop quarterbacks. It's good business. By the way, even if you disagree with that, which I don't really guess why you would, and I understand they have a lot of picks, they have a lot of needs, but guess what? You got Stidham on an expiring contract who hasn't latched on yet. It doesn't seem like they like him very much. I mean, so that's just my opinion. It just seems that way. That's how it's come across to us. Brian Hoyer could retire at any minute. I'm not even sure if he's going to be coaching, not coaching. It seems like they're paying him to be a player coach on the field. They need a backup. They need a guy that they need to develop. I don't really think this pick, Steve, was that surprising. What are your thoughts on the player and of that conversation?
Well, again, I think, you look at the player. He's a lot like Mac Jones. He doesn't have the cannon for an arm, but he's smart. He knows where to place the football. And, hey, by the way, he set an NCAA record with 62 touchdown passes last year.
Yep.
I mean, the guy he can play football. And again, I mean, as you said, Stidham has not, solidified his position here. I think he's out. And with Brian Hoyer, I mean, we all know, I mean, he's getting up there in years. And they have him around as a mentor, but how much longer will Mac Jones need a mentor at this point? So they have to develop a really good backup quarterback, and why not go for a guy that fits in the type of offensive system that you play? And I think it has nothing to do with they're not happy with Mac Jones. I mean, I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a stupid conversation.
Mac Jones is backup. And, they want to see him excel. So if anything happens to Jones, this guy can step in. Jason Stidham is that guy.
I would say Zappy Steve, to me, another kind of boomer bust guy. And again, it's the fourth round. Okay, you're throwing darts, right? But physically doesn't do a lot of things incredibly well. It doesn't have the strongest arm, isn't the fastest release. Okay, he doesn't release, not a mobile guy. Okay, but look at the numbers. And he's done this through, I know Western Kentucky isn't necessarily Alabama, but I mean, just his last 2 years in high school, he threw for 79 touchdowns and 7,000 yards. How many touchdowns did you say he threw for his last year? You just said
62.
62
touchdowns.
Okay, so I mean, to me, and look, you can go through his production. You look through it; it's impressive. It's like whoa, and I know that's kind of an air raid Texas Tech kind of offense and things like that. But still, I would say there are some things to like about him, and that much production warrants maybe taking him, over some other guys with more physical talent. To me, it's again, you're trying to draft and develop a quarterback. You hope he turns into something, and hey, if he does, maybe you can flip him for a draft pick later, or you have a guy that can step in if Mac Jones, knock on wood, it gets hurt or sidelined for a period of time. Okay, so that's what you're getting here with that Zappy. I personally would probably rather go with a person who has or a player that has better traits and not as much production, but the production over traits can't be ignored when it's like this, in my opinion. This is just my opinion, okay? Steve, this probably is one of the picks I dislike the most of the entire class. Nothing against Kevin Harris. I mean, I'm not crazy about him as a player, and I'll let you do the share on this because you are our resident Gamecock. But to me, Steve, you already have a lot of running backs on the roster. I did think running back was a need. They took one a couple picks prior. Pierre Strong, we just talked about it. And in fact, it was, let's see here, I'm doing math on it's like 56-ish picks ahead of him. So you take another running back. Now, I was surprised. I really was. My first reaction was a second running back. I just couldn't believe it. Give me your thoughts on Kevin Harris. I want to hear your thoughts.
Well, as you know, I love my Gamecocks from South Carolina. So I like the player. I was a little surprised, as you were, that I mean, 6th round pick, you're not expecting him to be, starter on day one. But again, I was a little surprised that they took a second running back because they do have a deep group of running backs. What their plans are for him, I don't know. I mean, he had the back surgery, but 2 years ago, he led the SEC in rushing.
Yep.
So, he's a, I mean, and there's nothing elusive about this guy. He is a really tough, full on. He's like a bruiser. He's like a bowling ball in there. I mean, he's a really tough guy. So I mean, maybe they're looking at him, helping out with Ramondre Stevenson in short yardage, stuff like that. Until he gets his feet wet, or they did release, their practice squad running back.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
I don't know.
Zebo.
I mean, I was surprised with this pick because I really didn't think they needed another running back, but I'm not going to say no to a Gamecock. So
I'll say this. I think similar. Well, I don't want to even say that, but I would say potentially. I think as a prospect, excuse me, I'm kind of delayed in my thought here. As a prospect, I think he has the potential to contribute on an NFL team. I'm not saying that he wasn't like a guy who shouldn't be drafted. That's not fair. The reason I just like the pick is because I just didn't think you needed to draft two running backs. I just think there are, again, other positions. I'd rather them just take another cornerback for all I care. I mean, you need to draft and develop guys at a lot of other positions. Running back, I would say confidently. I don't want to speak for Patriots fans, but if we polled Patriots fans prior to the draft, I think most people would say running back would be one of the most positions they'd have the most confidence in. So I didn't really think drafting two would be, in the cards, but here we are. Someone who I do think could be kind of a north and south runner. He did lead the SEC in rushing, like you said, was that 2 years ago? So he's someone who's done it at a very high level. I hope it works out. I'd be shocked to see him early with just the kind of logjam they have at the position, but they want to run the ball. They want to have tough players. And this draft, Steve, I was going to say this for the end, but I'm kind of working into it now. This draft, Steve, looked at, a lot of people were like, well, they need help on defense. They need help on defense. And I agree. I was one of those people. But if you remember, like a show or two before the draft, I did say, if they would kind of all in on offense, with some high potential picks on offense, they could get that unit closer and then take a couple seasons to bring the defense in. And they went after a guard to protect Mac Jones. They went to a receiver that Mac Jones could throw the ball deep to, which he throws an excellent deep ball. They went with multiple running backs and then multiple offensive linemen late. So I think this draft had a lot to do with putting guys around Mac Jones for him to be successful for the next few years while they overhaul the defense. That's just my opinion. Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, and again, it goes back to what Matt Gross said. I mean, we thought they were going to target linebacker, and he gave the impression that they're pretty happy with the young guys that they have, and they believe in them. And as you and I said, I want to see what they have in all these guys. Josh Uche, Ronnie Perkins, Cameron McGrone, Raekwon McMillan. I mean, they just picked up Mac Wilson. So,
Yep.
I want to see what they have in these guys. And again, if it doesn't work out, okay, it didn't work out. You made a mistake there, and you can fix that. I think you can find some linebackers, even during the season. You can make a trade, if guys aren't working out. But I think having Juwan Bentley back is a plus, especially on early downs. But, I don't disagree with that line of reasoning, like you said, that they're going to surround Mac Jones in year two with people that are going to help the offense, because, the offense was easily stopped last year.
Mm-hmm.
When they played against
people said
the better teams, they were easily stopped because they didn't have that dynamic wide receiver. They didn't have that speed, and teams were stacking the box because they knew they wanted to run the football.
100%. People
now they've
said it was
that.
Easy to defend. It was easy to defend offense.
They have the most athletic guard in the draft, the fastest wide receiver, and the fastest running back. So, I mean, I think they've recognized that they were speed deficient on offense.
Yep.
And I'm intrigued to see how these guys are going to work out. I mean, normally the Patriots don't like to work guys a lot, other than the linemen, in year one. But I think that they have plans for all of these guys in year one this year.
Yep, and they really like their guards to be able to move because Shaq Mason was great at pulling, and Cole Strange has good feet. They're going to want him to pull. They want to run. Okay, so I get it from an athletic standpoint. We've talked about that for 2 years, pounding the table. They need to get younger, faster, more athletic. They did that in a lot of players in this draft, and it shows. And I think that they realized, like you said, hey, we're not creating very explosive plays on offense. We are easy to defend. The Patriots offense, when you have the players, difficult to defend. We saw that with Brady and Edelman and Welker and Gronk for so many years, but they don't have the players right now, and that's what's really hurting them. Offensively, I still think that they need to work on a couple of things, but the development of Mac Jones is the most important thing, and they put a lot of guys around Mac to help him grow in year two. But let's move on because we got 3 guys left, and we're almost at the end of our show time. So our next player that we're going to talk about is Sam Robertson from Northwest Missouri State. Interesting pick, Steve. He was the defensive player of the year for the Division II college football. I think it's called the Cliff Harris Award, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Let me just say this. I have no idea if this guy's going to be good or not. Wasn't on my radar. Can't even pretend he was. If you look at the highlight film of this guy, he is throwing dudes around. Okay, he's 6'4", like 295. I mean, he's a big boy on the defensive line. I don't know if he's going to hit or not, but if he can either be a 3-tech defensive end, or maybe if he does make the team, you pair him next to Christian Barmore on passing downs, on third downs, and let him just go hunt. I want to see this guy up close, because if you're going to get taken from a Division II school, you're going to be one that stands out. Kyle Duggar stood out. Sam Roberts definitely stands out. Really fascinating athletic profile, Steve. Share your thoughts on Sam Roberts.
Yeah, again, I mean, real small school, Northwest Missouri State, Division II. But, like you said, if you're going to take a guy at that level, you want to see him dominate. And as you said, he dominates. This kid, I mean, he was throwing people around. Yep. So I'm intrigued to see what he could do. I mean, again, you're picking a guy at 200, so it's not like, they're taking Sam Roberts, with the, 85th pick or whatever.
Right.
But, he has that ability. We'll see if he can step it up a notch, with increased competition. But like you said, if he works out, even in the first year or two, it's just a sub package, pass rusher, that's a win. That's a definite win.
I mean, I'll say this as well about Roberts. He had 61 tackles last year, and he's a defensive lineman. I mean, that just shows how active he was. 13 games, and you had 61 tackles. That's a lot.
Non-stop motor, too.
Yep, 6.5 sacks. I mean, he was an active player, and there's not a whole lot of information about him, or let me say this, there's not as much information about him as there are some of these other players that we already talked about, and there's not as much highlights or game film or anything like that. You really have to dig for it a little bit more. From the little bit that I've been able to reach into, Steve, totally get why they went after the player. I think he's fascinating. And again, you're throwing darts here around 6, 200 overall. Okay, so let's hope he can kind of develop. These next 2 picks are both guys that I liked. Both that kind of, man, I'm really struggling for words today. I apologize, but I would say these kind of picks, Steve, that we're about to talk about are the guys that we talked about at the beginning of the show. The Patriots have been very good at identifying late, and I think that both of these players have the building blocks and the potential to be something long-term. Okay, first you got Hines, from the guard from LSU. Big dude we're going to talk about. Another guy, Andrew Stuber, in the next round. Another big guy at right tackle. Okay, so we're going to, as we're finishing up the show, we got these 2 big players, even the offensive line. Let's start with Hines because he went first. Share your thoughts on them taking another guard in this draft.
Yeah, again, a little surprising that they went for a guard, right? Because I'm thinking, well, I at this point in the draft, honestly, I basically had no clue where they were going with this. And but you're talking about a guy who played in the SEC, so you're talking unlike like a guy like Sam Roberts who was small school. I mean, you're taking a guy who played at a very very high level.
Yep.
So he's powerful. He's 6'2". I think he's 327.
Correct.
He's got the size and toughness. He's strong, very aggressive in the running game. And, Lance Zierlein from NFL.com says, he has decent techniques as a pass blocker. That's something he's going to have to work on. And the other thing that dropped his draft projections a little bit was he had a little bit of a weight problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of analysts are looking at this guy like, okay, he might move to a center in the future, or he could be a backup guard. But, as a rookie, if he makes the roster, I think, he's somebody they can work with.
Yeah, I think for him, the weight thing was a big concern. And I think when you are a collegiate player at a high program like that, the ability to get kind of whatever you want is just easy. And some guys can handle things really well, and some guys can't. And I'm not trying to disparage the player at all. I just think that when you have access to like food and like whatever snacks, like whatever you want, I think it's easy for some of those guys to not be as in good shape. And I think being in a professional environment could help him a little bit. They've had experience with players like Trent Brown keeping weight, in a certain range. For years, they had Vince Wilfork between a certain range. Like he was in like they had him listed at like 320, but he was like 360. It felt like it sometimes. He was a monster.
Vince was no 320.
Yeah, 320 from the waist down. I just think Hines is a prototypical Patriots draft pick late, a guy who could potentially make the team as a backup guard, could potentially play center in the future. He's a bully in the run game. He's built thick. He went to a good program, played well. I mean, there's a lot to like about Hines, where they were picking, and this is why I've liked so many of their picks in the past in this range, but I digress, okay? I do like the pick a lot. No idea if he makes the team. I think this is the kind of player that he could stick around as a practice squatter, even if he doesn't make the team, because he has positional versatility and he does really well in the run game, and they're a run-heavy team. This is someone I would keep an eye out for. Stuber, another interesting guy, another big guy, right? Projects as a right tackle. The Patriots are probably going to need a right tackle, if not next year, the year after. And went to Michigan. I went back to listen to our offensive line show. We didn't talk about him, I don't believe. And honestly, that was an omission because we should have talked about any offensive lineman from Michigan. We are going to dive right into next year. Okay. There's a pipeline that they like. And so that's something that we should keep an eye on. For me, Stuber, Steve, another some similarities to Hines, big burly frame, played at a very highly touted collegiate program. Someone who probably is not going to be in the mix to start right away, but could be a developmental guy with a lot of traits. Any thoughts on Andrew Stuber here in the last pick of the draft?
It's funny you mentioned the prototypical Patriots pick for Hines. I thought that was Stuber, excuse me, from Michigan. It's funny because he's 7th round, 245, and when they picked him, I was like, this guy's going to make the roster. And he's probably going to end up playing some snaps because this is the kind of guy they always traditionally found. He's a really big kid, 6'7", 325.
Yep.
He played in 34 games at Michigan. So you're talking high-level college football and, 22 starts. And you talk about versatility. He had 20 starts at right tackle, 2 at right guard. And at the Senior Bowl, they asked him to fill in, and he did well as a center. So you're talking versatility here. The Michigan coaches, I started reading about him after they selected him. They said he was one of the smartest guys on their offense. And that's something Belichick just loves in his draft picks. He likes smart, tough football players. I think he checks the block on that. I think he's a better run blocker than he is pass blocker at this stage of his career. But we'll see how he works out. At this point at 245, if he doesn't, then, it's not like they invested a whole lot of capital. But I have a feeling this guy's going to make the roster.
I really like this pick. I actually was surprised he went. I thought there was a chance he was going to go early day 3. And because he did play well at Michigan, he does. Honestly, from what I read, and I was digging around because I was like, damn, this seems like a player that should have gone a little bit earlier. And he has 34-inch arms, which is phenomenal because it helps keep those defenders at bay. But one of the things that I honestly think hurt him, Steve, was his height. And people get wary about, really tall tackles because of so many guys that have the ability to bend and dip around the edge on the defenders. But the Patriots are not afraid of tall tackles. Nate Solder, Sebastian Vollmer, they've had these guys, in the building. And Stuber is a smart player, a lot of starts, pipeline to a school that they trust the coaching there, good technique. He's strong. He's active in the run game. He's been moved around several places. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, it just makes total sense. It's like, why would you even draft a guard in the first round when you can find guys like this at the bottom of the draft? I kid, of course. I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry. Steve, honestly, there's a lot of players in this draft class that I really enjoy. I'm not going to give it a grade. Okay, I don't really care about draft grades. Talk to me in 2 or 3 years. We'll have a good discussion about it. I would just say this: I do think that they added some good talent, but in order for this draft class to stand out, they're going to need to get some kind of ROI back. My concern for this draft class, Steve, is that I don't know. I do think Cole Strange is going to start from day 1, and I do think that you might get something from Thornton potentially, although you seem to be a little more optimistic than me. But I think the Jones cornerbacks could potentially be involved early. I just don't know if you're going to get that return on investment in year 1 from this class. And that to me is the thing that is a little more frustrating because it's a team that needs a lot of help. I'm not saying that all these picks are bad. I just don't know if you're going to see a lot of them on the field from day 1 early. That would be my biggest worry. But we won't know until we know, right? Do you agree or disagree? And give me your thoughts on the class before we wrap up.
Well, again, I mean, I thought the theme of this draft class for the Patriots, they recognized that they needed to get faster, more athletic, and I think they did that. So, like you said, I think this draft class, and let's face it, I think no matter who they took, that some of the media types that we all know in Boston, we're going to pan it regardless.
Yeah.
So they were going to pan
whatever,
as you know, whoever they take, they were going to pan it. But, I do think that they need some of these guys to step up in year 1, unlike other years where they let some of these guys develop, and it was kind of a red shirt freshman season for them, rookie season, I should say. So, I think they are going to need these guys to step up and contribute. Maybe not as a starter, other than Strange in year 1, but I think you're going to need production from the Jones kids. I think obviously Strange will be a starter. I think Thornton and Strong need to contribute as well. But
yeah, I agree.
If they can, this might be a really good draft class, despite what everyone's saying.
Yeah, I mean, people are panicking. I mean, I think consistently I've seen the Patriots receive pretty low grades from a lot of different outlets. Some of the lower grades. I would say this. I thought the Jets had a phenomenal draft. Literally just knocked it out of the park, their first few picks. But guess what? For one, they should have had a good draft because they had so many picks high. And how many times have we heard that before in the last few years? Like, let's see if they screw it up. Honestly, I'm not even being sarcastic. I'm being dead serious. It's like, no, I don't know what Robert Saleh is going to do. I think Joe Douglas has a clue, but until they show that they can do it, I'm not going to I'm not going to crown them. And for the Patriots, or as well, I'm not, even though I think that Bill has struggled in the draft for some of the last few years. I thought last year was pretty good, but I think, 5-6 years ago, I mean, there's a reason Robert Kraft called him to the carpet a little bit at the owners' meeting. I mean, he didn't just make that up. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you the draft class is horrible until we see these guys on the field. And I just think it's going to take 2 or 3 years, like it always does, to kind of see what you got. And that's why, Steve, aside from these players, it's so important that they get some return on investment from Cameron McGrone. Mac Wilson will put in the conversation. Josh Uche, Ronnie Perkins. Those guys are going to be just as important as some of these players here, if not more so, because they were kind of redshirting last year. But these are high-ish picks that the Patriots have taken in the front seven.
I think you can put Anthony Jennings in the field.
Yeah,
because he's one of those bigger type linebackers, and they need that edge-setting guy, and he hasn't shown he could do that yet. But this is a big year for him in year 3. So
absolutely, absolutely it is. And bottom line here is that we'll find out. We'll find out, I guess, when we see him on the field. Okay, but I do think that there is some intrigue with some of these guys here, and I'm excited to see what they can bring to the team because the Patriots need help. Okay, so we're going to find out what they're going to look like. But to wrap up the show, I want to thank everybody for listening. Again, I want to apologize for Steve and I's behalf of being a week delayed in this. We will try to bring another show to you soon. But thank you for everyone for listening to this episode of Patriots 4th and 2. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and YouTube as we are, right, exactly, as the banner shows below. It does help if you leave a review, share us, give us a rating. It helps other Patriots fans find us, keeps us higher up in the podcast rankings. And, we do appreciate it. We did get some comments. I try to read them, but there's just a lot going on. So I appreciate if you interact with the show at all. And Steve and I, for Patriots 4th and 2, the official podcast of PatsFans.com, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening.